The mystery surrounding the death of Peter III is one of the most enigmatic and dramatic chapters in Russian history. This figure was surrounded by intrigue, betrayal, power struggles, and unsolved mysteries that continue to intrigue researchers and ordinary people alike. Why did the legitimate emperor fall victim to a coup? Was he murdered, or was his death just a coincidence? What versions are still being discussed in the scientific world, and why does this story remain relevant centuries later? Today, we will try to sort out these questions and shed light on one of the most notorious mysteries of the Russian monarchy. The last days of Peter III's reign were filled with anxiety and tension. In the early summer of 1762, the emperor, grandson of Peter the Great, felt insecure on the throne. His reforms caused discontent among the nobility and the guard, and his relationship with his wife, Catherine Alexeyevna, was becoming increasingly strained. Rumors of a possible conspiracy were spreading in the capital, and Peter III himself, despite his outward confidence, was on his guard. In those days, St. Petersburg was waiting for change. The nobility and the military discussed the emperor's latest decrees, many of which ran counter to tradition. The abolition of the secret chancellery, the attempt to make peace with Prussia, and discontent among church circles all created an atmosphere of instability. Peter III, despite his fears, continued his endeavors, unaware that his days on the throne were numbered. At the end of June 1762, Catherine began to act. A circle of supporters ready for decisive action formed around her. Among them were the Orlov brothers, Panin, Razumovsky, and other influential figures. Preparations for the coup were carried out in the strictest secrecy, but rumors still leaked into high society. Despite the alarming signs, Peter Fyodorovich did not take any serious measures to protect himself. He relied on his popularity among the army and the people and underestimated the scale of the conspiracy. At this time, Catherine was already preparing her entry into the political arena, counting on the support of the guard and part of the aristocracy. The climax came on the night of June 28th. Catherine was proclaimed empress, and Peter III found himself isolated. His last hours on the throne were overshadowed by the betrayal of his closest associates and the realization that he had completely lost power. A new page in Russian history was turning, a page in which the fate of Peter III was sealed. After the overthrow of Peter III, historians still argue about the underlying causes of this event. In the early summer of 1762, discontent with the emperor's policies was growing in Russian society. His reforms, aimed at rapprochement with Prussia and the abolition of some established orders, caused irritation in the army, among the nobility, and the clergy. Many believed that Peter II was too enamored with foreign customs, neglected Russian traditions, and his sympathy for Frederick the Great was perceived as a betrayal of national interests. At this time, Catherine Alexeyevna, the emperor's wife, was strengthening her position at court. She skillfully built relationships with influential guards officers, among whom the Orlov brothers stood out in particular. Grigory Orlov became not only her confidant, but also one of the key organizers of the future coup. Catherine also secured the support of part of the higher nobility, who were dissatisfied with Peter III's policies and feared for their privileges. The palace coup was carefully planned. On the night of June 28, 1762, Catherine left her palace and went to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment. There she was greeted with enthusiasm. The guards swore allegiance to her. Soon, other regiments joined her. and rumors of a change of power began to spread throughout the city. Peter III, who was in Oranienbaum at the time, was taken by surprise. He did not expect such decisive action from his wife and her supporters. Within a few hours, the capital was under Catherine's control. She was proclaimed empress, and Peter III was stripped of his power. His closest associates, realizing the futility of resistance, either swore allegiance to the new ruler or were arrested. Peter himself was forced to sign an abdication. For many contemporaries, these events came as a shock. Just the day before, no one could have imagined that the change of power would happen so quickly and with almost no bloodshed. However, behind the outward appearance of a bloodless coup lay deep contradictions and tensions. Many officers and officials did not immediately decide on their position, and alarming rumors spread among the people. Catherine understood that holding on to power would be no less difficult than seizing it. That is why she immediately began to strengthen her position by handing out awards and promises to loyal supporters and eliminating possible centers of resistance. After signing his abdication, Peter III found himself effectively a prisoner of his former subjects. He was transferred from Oranienbaum to the Ropsha Palace, a country residence far from the capital. Officially, this was explained by concerns for the safety of the deposed emperor, but the real goal was to isolate him and control his actions. In Ropsha, Peter found himself completely cut off from the outside world. He was accompanied only by a few close associates, and specially appointed officers strictly monitored his movements. The first days in Ropsha were filled with anxiety and despair. Peter Fyodorovich tried to understand what had happened and how he had managed to lose everything so quickly. He wrote letters to Catherine, begging her to spare him and allow him to leave Russia. However, his requests went unanswered. Peter's entourage consisted mainly of people loyal to the new regime. Among them was Alexei Orlov, whom Catherine trusted completely to carry out this delicate mission. Rumors about the fate of the former emperor quickly spread throughout St. Petersburg and the surrounding area. Some claimed that he was under strict arrest, others that he was allowed to move freely around the palace. However, eyewitnesses noted that Peter was depressed, his health was deteriorating, and his mood was becoming increasingly gloomy. He feared for his life and understood that his position was extremely precarious. At this time, Catherine was consolidating her power in the capital. She closely monitored all reports from Ropsha, demanding regular updates on the former emperor's condition. It was important to the empress that Peter did not become a symbol of opposition and did not attempt to regain the throne with the help of dissatisfied nobles or foreign powers. Therefore, strict security was organized around Ropsha, and any attempts to establish contact with the outside world were harshly suppressed. Peter III spent only a few days in the Ropsha Palace, which proved to be a real ordeal for him. He was deprived of his usual luxuries, communication, and even the ability to make decisions on his own. All this only increased his anxiety and despair. It was during these days, according to many historians, that his future fate was sealed. Immediately after the news of Peter III's death, various rumors began to spread throughout Russian society. The official version seemed too simple and convenient for the new authorities, and therefore many did not believe in the natural death of the former emperor. In St. Petersburg and the provinces, stories circulated that Peter had been killed on the orders of Catherine or her associates. There were tales among the people about mysterious events in Ropsha, about strange visitors who appeared at night, and about the former emperor's body allegedly being secretly removed from the palace. One of the most popular versions was the story that Peter III had been strangled or poisoned. It was said that his death had been staged to avoid open conflict between Catherine's supporters and those of the deposed emperor. There were also those who claimed that Peter had not died at all, but had been secretly taken abroad, where he lived under a false name. These rumors were fueled by the lack of reliable information about the last days of Peter's life and contradictory eyewitness accounts. In some circles, letters and notes were circulated claiming that the former emperor had been killed on the personal orders of one of the Orlov brothers. These letters described the details of the alleged crime: a fight, traces of a struggle, attempts to hide the evidence. However, none of these letters were officially recognized as authentic, and their authors remained unknown. Nevertheless, these stories quickly grew with new details and became part of oral tradition. Catherine II occupied a special place in the folk versions of the story. She was accused of cruelty, cunning, and a desire to hold on to power at any cost. At the same time, there were those who justified the Empress's actions, believing that Peter III's death was inevitable in the context of palace intrigue. The people perceived Catherine as both a savior and a usurper, and her role in the events of that summer was discussed for many years to come. Rumors and speculation about the death of Peter III became an integral part of Russian historical memory. They were passed down from generation to generation, becoming the basis for literary works, theatrical productions, and even political slogans. Despite all the efforts of the authorities to control information, the mystery of the emperor's death continued to stir people's minds and remained the subject of fierce debate and investigation. After Peter III's death, letters related to the Orlov brothers, especially Alexei Orlov, attracted the attention of historians and contemporaries. It was he who was appointed by Catherine II to be responsible for the former emperor's security in Ropsha and accompanied all the events of Peter's last days. Later, letters were found in archives and private collections in which Orlov shared his experiences and details of what had happened, but their authenticity and reliability are still disputed. One of the most famous letters is attributed to Alexei Orlov, who allegedly wrote to Catherine immediately after Peter's death. In this letter, Orlov reports on the sudden death of the former emperor, describes the circumstances of his illness, and expresses regret about what happened. The tone of the letter is restrained and formal, but some researchers see hints of the unnatural nature of Peter's death. In particular, attention is drawn to phrases such as unexpected complications and the need to act quickly. There are also letters in which Orlov justifies himself to Catherine, explaining that he did everything possible to save the former emperor's life but was unable to prevent the tragedy. These documents are often cited by supporters of the version of Catherine's innocence and that of her entourage. However, opponents of this view point out that the letters could have been written after the events to create the appearance of non-interference and remove suspicion from the Empress. Some historians believe that Orlov's letters are part of a broader campaign to control information. They emphasize loyalty to Catherine, the lack of personal initiative, and the tragedy of what happened. At the same time, private letters addressed to friends and relatives contain hints of Orlov's heavy moral burden and inner turmoil, which may indicate his involvement in the events in Ropsha. The question of the authenticity of Orlov's letters remains open. Some documents are recognized as authentic, while others are considered forgeries created later to justify or accuse the participants in the coup. Nevertheless, it is these letters that have become one of the main sources for studying the circumstances of Peter III's death and still cause controversy among researchers and publicists. After Peter III's death, the attention of contemporaries and historians naturally focused on the figure of Catherine II. For many, there was no doubt that she was the main beneficiary of the palace coup and the events that followed. Catherine came to power as a result of a carefully planned operation involving her close associates, and she herself showed determination and political foresight. Catherine's motives were complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, she sought to protect her own interests and ensure security for herself and her son, the future Paul Voice. Despite their formal marriage, Peter III had long been a stranger to her, and his policies and personal behavior made Catherine fear for her position. She understood that in a climate of instability and discontent, any delay could lead to her arrest or even death. On the other hand, Catherine saw the coup as an opportunity to realize her political ambitions. She was educated, skilled at building relationships with influential circles, and enjoyed the support of part of the guard and the nobility. After Peter III was overthrown, Catherine immediately set about strengthening her power. She handed out awards, appointed loyal people to key posts, and carried out reforms that were intended to demonstrate her concern for the state. Catherine's benefit from the removal of Peter III was obvious. She got rid of an inconvenient and unpredictable spouse who could at any moment try to regain the throne or organize resistance. In addition, the death of the former emperor allowed her to avoid a long struggle for power and focus on reforms in the country. To legitimize her rule, Catherine actively used propaganda, emphasizing her role as the savior of Russia from chaos and incompetence. However, the question of Catherine's personal involvement in the death of Peter III remains controversial. Her actions reveal cold calculation and a desire to retain power at any cost, but no direct evidence of her involvement in the murder has been found. Many documents were destroyed or classified, and the testimonies of contemporaries are contradictory. Nevertheless, it was Catherine who became a symbol of a new era in Russian history, and her motives and benefits from the elimination of Peter III continue to arouse interest and controversy among researchers. The events surrounding the death of Peter III caused a public outcry and left behind a wealth of evidence in the letters, memoirs, and diaries of his contemporaries. These documents have become essential sources for historians attempting to reconstruct the true picture of what happened. However, eyewitness accounts are often contradictory, which only adds to the mystery surrounding the last days of the former emperor. Some of the first accounts came from court doctors and officers who were in Ropsha. Their records mention a sharp deterioration in Peter's condition, his fears and suspicions. Some noted that the former emperor looked depressed and often complained of feeling unwell, while others said that he was frightened and expected the worst. The doctors who were allowed to examine the body after his death left brief and restrained reports, avoiding details and clearly fearing the consequences of candor. The diaries of foreign diplomats who were in St. Petersburg in the summer of 1762 occupy a special place among the evidence. Ambassadors from Prussia, France, England, and other countries closely followed developments and regularly sent reports to their capitals. Their letters contain hints about the artificial nature of Peter's death, doubts about the official version, and suspicions about the involvement of Catherine's entourage. Some diplomats wrote directly about a possible murder, citing rumors and conversations in high society. No less important are the recollections of ordinary people, servants, officers, and residents of nearby villages. Their stories are full of emotion, speculation, and rumors, But it is these details that allow us to feel the atmosphere of that time. Many noted that after Peter's death, an uneasy silence reigned in Ropsha, and the palace was surrounded by guards. There were also those who claimed to have seen suspicious people leaving the palace at night or heard screams and the sound of a struggle. Contemporary accounts often differ in detail, but they agree on one thing. Peter III's death was perceived by society as an extraordinary and mysterious event. Even decades later, participants and eyewitnesses of those events could not come to a consensus about what had happened in Ropsha. Their memories became the basis for numerous studies, works of art, and historical discussions that continue to this day. Immediately after Peter III's death, the question of the causes of his death became the subject of particular attention not only in Russian society, but also among representatives of the highest circles and foreign diplomats. The official version, announced by the court, did not satisfy many contemporaries, so the autopsy of the former emperor's body took on special significance. However, this process was shrouded in mystery and controversy. The autopsy was conducted in strict secrecy. Only a few court physicians, including some of the most renowned specialists of the time, were allowed to examine Peter's body. The doctors drew up an official report stating that the cause of death was acute intestinal inflammation complicated by internal bleeding. The document emphasized the absence of any signs of violent death, but the details of the autopsy were described in an extremely sparse and cautious manner, which aroused new suspicions among contemporaries. Many researchers noted that the medical documents in the case of Peter III were unusually restrained. The doctors avoided mentioning any external injuries or signs of a struggle, although in private conversations, some of them hinted at the presence of bruises and abrasions on the body. These details later formed the basis of theories about the former emperor's violent death and also gave rise to rumors of pressure being exerted on the doctors by the authorities. The question of the authenticity of the medical reports occupies a special place in the history of the autopsy. Over time, new documents appeared in the archives, some of which contradicted each other. Some reports confirmed the official version, while others hinted at the unnatural nature of the death. There were even cases of forgery of documents in order to justify or, conversely, incriminate those involved in the events. Historians still argue about the authenticity of the surviving documents, and their analysis is the subject of special research. The fate of the original medical records also raises questions. It is known that some of the documents were destroyed or lost in the following years, while others ended up in private collections and became available to researchers only centuries later. This circumstance only reinforced the atmosphere of mystery surrounding the death of Peter III and the autopsy of his body. Thus, the medical documents related to the death of Peter III have become not only a source of information for historians, but also a reason for new disputes and hypotheses. Their ambiguity and contradictions still do not allow us to answer unequivocally the question of the former emperor's cause of death. And the mystery of the autopsy remains one of the most intriguing pages in Russian history. The last hours of Peter III's life in the Ropsha Palace are shrouded in mystery and speculation. It is known that during this period, only a select few were allowed to be near the former emperor, those whom Catherine II completely trusted to carry out this delicate mission. The main figures among the conspirators were the Orlov brothers, especially Alexei Orlov, as well as several officers assigned to guard and monitor Peter. According to surviving documents and the recollections of contemporaries, on the night of July 6, 1762, a tense atmosphere reigned in Ropsha. The officers responsible for security did not leave their posts, and the servants acted according to strict instructions. At that moment, Peter III was almost completely isolated. He was not allowed to meet with outsiders, and all his actions were carefully monitored. Alexei Orlov held a special place among the conspirators. According to some sources, he was the one who was with Peter in his final hours and oversaw everything that was happening. His role was twofold. On the one hand, he had to ensure the safety of the former emperor, and on the other, he had to prevent any attempts to escape or communicate with the outside world. Orlov later repeatedly justified himself in his letters, claiming that he had acted solely on Catherine's orders and had no personal interest in the outcome of events. Among the other people present in Ropsha were officers Fyodor Baryatinsky, Ivan Potemkin, and Alexander Polyansky. Their duties included guarding the palace, monitoring Peter's movements, and reporting to Catherine on the former emperor's every move. Some historians believe that these officers may have been the direct executors of the orders related to the fate of Peter III. However, their own recollections are extremely sparse and contradictory. Most of them avoided details and preferred not to discuss the events of that night. Rumors about what happened in Ropsha quickly spread throughout St. Petersburg. It was said that on the night of Peter's death, screams and the sounds of a struggle could be heard in the palace, and in the morning, servants discovered the body of the former emperor with signs of violence. Officials denied these reports, claiming that death had come suddenly and without external intervention. Nevertheless, many contemporaries were convinced that the conspirators played a decisive role in the tragic finale. Historians still argue about the degree of responsibility of each of the participants in the events in Ropsha. Some believe that the conspirators acted on Catherine's direct orders, while others believe that they made their own decision based on the situation at hand. In any case, it was these people who found themselves at the epicenter of one of the most mysterious and dramatic pages in Russian history, and their names will forever be associated with the mysterious death of Peter III. Immediately after the death of Peter III, alternative versions of what happened began to appear in Russian society and beyond. The official version seemed too convenient for the new authorities, and many contemporaries did not believe in the natural death of the former emperor. One of the most popular alternative hypotheses was that Peter's death was staged and that he was secretly taken from Ropsha and lived for many more years under a false name. Stories about Peter III's escape spread not only among the common people, but also in the highest circles. It was said that the former emperor had managed to negotiate with his guards or had been freed by his supporters, after which he fled abroad. Numerous testimonies were cited in support of this version. Peter was allegedly seen in various European cities, met with in Prussia, or even in Siberia. Some claim that he lived under the name of Fyodor Kuzmich, or other mysterious figures who appeared in Russian history later. A special place among the alternative versions is occupied by the story of the body swap. According to one hypothesis, it was not Peter III who was buried in Ropsha, but another man who looked like the emperor. This version explained the lack of a detailed description of the autopsy and the oddities in the medical documents. Supporters of the substitution theory pointed to contradictions in the recollections of eyewitnesses, as well as the disappearance of some witnesses to the events. There were also more exotic versions associated with mysticism and superstition. For example, it was said that Peter III was cursed or fell victim to a secret society operating at court. Despite the lack of evidence, these stories resonated with a section of the population inclined to see the emperor's tragedy as the manifestation of higher powers and conspiracies. Historians and researchers have different opinions about the reliability of these alternative versions. Some consider them to be the product of popular imagination and an attempt to explain the inexplicable, while others point to real inconsistencies in documents and testimonies. In any case, alternative hypotheses have become an integral part of the legend of Peter III and continue to inspire writers, filmmakers, and researchers to this day. After Peter III's death, the fate of his body became the subject of special attention and numerous rumors. Catherine II's official orders stipulated that the former emperor be buried quickly and as modestly as possible to avoid unnecessary public attention and possible unrest. Peter's body was transported from Ropsha to the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, where the funeral took place. The preparations for the funeral were carried out in strict secrecy. Only trusted individuals and court physicians were allowed to approach the body, and they were ordered to ensure that the deceased's appearance remained intact. Peter's coffin was sealed, and its appearance was carefully concealed from prying eyes. Even his closest relatives were not allowed to say goodbye to the former emperor in public, which gave rise to new suspicions and speculation. Peter III's funeral was held without much pomp and circumstance. Only a few representatives of the nobility, courtiers, and clergy attended the ceremony. Officials emphasized that everything was organized according to tradition, but eyewitnesses noted the unusual haste and restraint of the event. There were no funeral processions, no public farewells, no mass gatherings of people. Everything looked like an attempt to quickly close a page of history that was inconvenient for the new authorities. Subsequently, Peter III's burial place became a place of pilgrimage for his supporters and the curious. Some claimed that the coffin with his body was placed in a secluded corner of the cathedral, while others claimed that it had been secretly moved to another location. There were stories among the people that strange phenomena occurred at the former emperor's grave, and some even believed that he had not been buried at all. Official documents related to Peter's funeral are concise and lack detail. Historians still argue about the reliability of the surviving information and do not rule out the possibility of body substitution or secret rituals. Nevertheless, the fact remains. After his death, Peter III was buried without any special honors, and his grave remained in the shadows of the great events of Russian history for a long time. The fate of Peter III's body became another element of the mystery surrounding his life and death. The lack of transparency, the hastiness of the funeral, and numerous rumors only reinforced the atmosphere of mystery that still surrounds the former emperor's name. The death of Peter III was not only a personal tragedy, but also an event that had a profound impact on the political and social life of the Russian Empire. The sudden disappearance of the legitimate monarch caused a wave of anxiety among the nobility, the guard, and the common people. For many of his contemporaries, it was a signal to rethink their own loyalty and political views. In the first weeks after Peter's funeral, an atmosphere of uncertainty reigned in the capital and the provinces. Nobles who had previously supported the emperor rushed to swear allegiance to the new ruler, fearing repression or the loss of privileges. The guard regiments, which played a key role in the coup, received generous rewards and honors, which strengthened their position in society and made the Guard the main stronghold of autocracy for many decades. The political consequences of Peter III's death were far-reaching. Catherine II, upon ascending the throne, immediately embarked on reforms aimed at strengthening her power and modernizing the country. She changed the structure of government, expanded the rights of the nobility, limited the influence of the church, and carried out a series of economic reforms. All this was intended to demonstrate to society that the new empress was capable of ensuring the stability and prosperity of the state. However, Peter III's death did not pass without a trace in the public consciousness. The people remained distrustful of the official version of events, and rumors of a conspiracy and the violent death of the former emperor fueled protest sentiments. In some regions, spontaneous demonstrations broke out, linked to dissatisfaction with Catherine's policies and nostalgia for the old order. These sentiments were particularly strong among the peasantry and the lower nobility, who saw Peter III as the defender of their interests. On the international stage, Peter III's death caused concern among European powers. Diplomats closely monitored developments in Russia, fearing instability and possible claims to the throne by foreign dynasties. Some countries even considered intervention, but Catherine's determination and energy quickly dispelled these fears. In the long term, the tragedy of Peter III became a lesson for all participants in Russian political life. It demonstrated the fragility of monarchical power and the importance of supporting key social groups: the guard, the nobility, and the clergy. The experience of the coup and the events that followed influenced the formation of the empire's political culture and strengthened the role of intrigue and backroom deals in the struggle for power. Thus, the death of Peter III became not only a mystery for historians, but also an important turning point in the development of Russian society and the state. Its consequences were felt for many years, determining the nature of Catherine II's reign and the fate of the entire country. At the beginning of the 21st century, interest in the fate of Peter III not only did not fade, but also took on new forms thanks to the development of historical science, the opening of archives, and the emergence of modern technologies for analyzing sources. Today, researchers have access to a much larger volume of documents than their predecessors and can draw not only on written evidence, but also on the results of forensic medical examinations, digital data processing, and interdisciplinary approaches. One of the most important achievements of modern historiography has been a more balanced approach to sources. Historians try to separate facts from myths, critically analyze the evidence of contemporaries, and compare it with official documents. This has made it possible to refute a number of persistent legends associated with the personality of Peter III, his character, and the circumstances of his death. For example, modern biographers note that the emperor was not as weak and spineless as he was portrayed in the propaganda of Catherine II's time, and that his reforms were profound and aimed at modernizing the country. At the same time, key questions about the last days of Peter III's life remain unresolved. Despite access to new archival materials and evidence, none of the versions, neither official nor alternative, has been fully and indisputably confirmed. Contemporary forensic studies conducted on the basis of surviving autopsy reports do not allow for a definitive conclusion about the cause of death. Contradictions in the documents, the disappearance of a number of original records, and forgeries discovered in the archives only add to the mystery. Particular attention is paid to analyzing the political context of the events. Modern researchers emphasize that Peter III's death was the result of a complex struggle for power, in which personal ambitions, the interests of the nobility, the influence of foreign powers, and the peculiarities of Russian political culture were intertwined. Catherine II is portrayed not only as a usurper, but also as a skilled politician who was able to take advantage of the situation and carry out the necessary reforms. In recent years, new perspectives on the role of the people in these events have emerged. Research shows that public opinion, rumors, and myths about Peter III's death became an important part of national identity, and the emperor himself became a symbol of the tragic fate of a reformer who was not accepted by his time. Thus, the modern view of the mystery of Peter III's death combines critical analysis of sources, the use of the latest research methods, and respect for the diversity of versions. Historians acknowledge that the final answer to the question of the emperor's fate may remain unattainable. But it is precisely this unsolved mystery that continues to draw attention to the personality of Peter III, his era, and the dramatic events of Russian history.